want to get some line paper out. We're not going to finish it today. I would say of the background notes that we do for any book, these are by far the most extensive ones. Pardon? We have some floating around in the building, but we don't have that one here. I bet more often than not, the covers tend to have something dealing with firefighter. So on this cover that's there, just so, let's see. I don't know why it's not zooming in. What you have here is you can see that you have, it looks almost like a spacesuit, like an astronaut's helmet. There's a reflection where you can see a book that is burning. And up here at the top it says 451. We have Fahrenheit 451. The book itself gives you a little bit of description of what's going on. Jack was asking about Montauk and all that kind of stuff. That's going to be our main character that we have. Fahrenheit 451. Fahrenheit, you know, is a sense of degrees. Fahrenheit Celsius. It's about a fire company. It's about firefighters. The company is, the department is number 451. It is a symbolic title so far as a temperature, in the sense that paper burns at the temperature of 451 degrees Fahrenheit. In the book, and it is a future dystopia, which we'll get into, in the book, the purpose of the fire company is they locate books and they burn them. So where we were answering, or at least some of us were answering, that books are a way to gain wisdom and maybe relate to others, but books are a way to gain wisdom. Books are censored, books are banned. There should not be, are not to be any kind of books in the 24th century that this would be taking place. Pardon? They don't.
Wait, they just sort of don't.
Yeah.
What about subtitles? What if they're like watching a movie and they're like all of a sudden it's Spanish?
TV definitely plays a big part, and so like this would be similar to the pedestrian, where when Leonard's walking around, you see the TVs glowing in everyone's house. TV is a big part of entertainment, how you would get information, but there wouldn't be this, hey, check this out, read, that there would be no reason to read. Now, this is where it is a fictional work, you know, and so some things that you could go, well, how does this happen? Clearly, people know how to read, because books do appear from time to time, and it's not that Josh looks at it and goes, what are those funny little symbols? This looks like hieroglyphics or whatnot. People have the ability to read, but they don't read. And it's an extension of the government not wanting them to read. So giving you a background, novels written by Ray Bradbury, who we talked about, celebrated science fiction writer. Began as a short story in 1951, evolved into a novel by 1953. You can write this word for word, or if you want to condense it, that's okay. You know who Ray Bradbury is, but you know, began as a short story, 51, evolved into a novel by 53. The short story is not the pedestrian. He does take some ideas from the pedestrian and puts them into the book, but the short story that he writes first is called The Fireman, and then it turns into this whole novel about fire company where they burn books. Houses are, and speaking of when people read books or read anything, there's no need for a fire company to put out fires because homes are fireproof. So there are not situations where you need the fire company to extinguish fires. There are only situations where you need the fire company to start fires. So if it becomes known that Jack has a book, fire company is going to go to the house, they're going to burn the book, and there's also a strong possibility that they're going to burn the house down along with it. And then you would go to jail as a criminal against the government. Essentially, you would be committing treason by trying to read. Nice. No math homework. No history homework. No study guides and reading 63 pages for next Tuesday. Are you kidding me, Mr. Kane? Those situations would not be around. so far as context, novels written during time period when the world is threatened by nuclear war. This is post-World War II, so this is like Cold War era, where there is that threat, or at least that fear of nuclear war is going to happen between the U.S. and Russia. Should we have a bomb, or should we have a drill where we have to shelter? What are we going to do in our school? In the 1950s, you would hide under your
Yes. Those totally like a thoughts.
Hey, it will preserve your life forever. These things are the best imitation wood that you could find. Hey, these tables look pretty good for their 13 years of service that they've done so far. But there's certainly a threat of nuclear war. There's fear about technologies that are emerging, and the idea that, you know, maybe the old traditional way of life is kind of going away and getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The big issue, and you can tell from the questions, you know, there was the idea about, have you been oversaturated by TV, media, technology? One of the main enemies of literature, books, but also thinking that gets presented in the book is technology. Now, we use technology all the time. You have iPads, cell phones, we use that. Certainly vehicles, cars are becoming more technologically advanced, homes, all those things. Keep in mind, this is written in 1953, where a lot of the ways that we use technology to our benefit have not even been considered yet at that point. So I think you certainly could go, well, this might be a little overboard, a little bit of an exaggeration, but the idea that do we become too dependent upon it will still be something that we take a look at. Historical context. World War II has ended just a few years before. So there's still kind of a lot of fear about international regimes, government. You've had this whole thing with Nazi Germany. Stalin is in charge of the Soviet Union at this point. There's a lot of fear about could some kind of another war take place that would be much more drastic. World War I, when it's fought at the time when the Metamorphosis, you know, is being written by Franz Kafka. What do they call World War I at the time? It's the Great War, and the other name is the War to End All Wars. They're not going to go, hey, World War I, because we're going to have another one here in about 25 years. But the thought was there won't be another war like this. And then you have one 20 years later, you know, starting in Europe in 1939, United States getting involved in 1941 with Pearl Harbor. World War II, much more, even on drastic global impact. You don't have war yet on U.S. soil outside of Hawaii, but it certainly seems that the world is getting smaller and there could be greater threats to Los Angeles, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. 1950s, nuclear weapons. The idea that we could send missiles, they could send missiles, we could be involved in this is really causing a lot of fear, anxiety for many, 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 many people. And, you know, it still kind of carries over in today's world with terrorism. So there's certainly some views that are going to take a look at this fear. You have the era of McCarthyism, which we're going to get into a little bit later. Has McCarthyism ever been covered yet in history class, social studies? Okay. McCarthyism deals with Red Scare of 1950s, where people are blindly being accused of being a communist. And so if you are a communist, therefore you are un-American, and you could be a spy, you could be someone who's going to commit treason or whatnot. So it's a fear of basically being un-American. Which one?
Oh.
The two most common they'll use is McCarthyism and also like Red Scare, which is the 20s and the 50s.
I think it was a Red Scare.
I'm not sure what they might have used. Like some people like refer to it as like the Purge, but that's more I think with like movie references to today's world than anything else.
I think it was
Witch hunts also get used. Xenophobia. Xenophobia is when you are afraid of other cultures and ethnicities. So that certainly would be a big part of what was happening. Like Japanese internment camps, people would look at as being xenophobic, you know, during World War II. Many sci-fi books, you know, it doesn't have to be sci-fi, but just a lot of books, movies are kind of reflecting this fear as to what, you know, the world could potentially bring with technology and the battles that could kind of happen along with it. That slide's not doing anything. We'll come back to that one later. All right. Some lasting effects from World War II, and this would pertain as to the whole context of the book. Hitler has been defeated after World War II, but during his reign, you had a lot of books were being burned in Nazi Germany. Some books were dealing with religious ideas, but any kind of book that would be dealing with some type of protest or any kind of book that would be considered anti-government, those ideas would be burned. Soviet Union and also China at the same time also start to ban and burn books. Does not mean all books get burned. So it's not that just by having a book it will be automatically removed, but any kind of book that is going to go against core beliefs of the country is certainly going to be a candidate to be censored, to be burned, to be removed from shelves. If you live in a communist country, then that is to be secular, where there would not be any religious ideology. So it would not be uncommon for Bibles to be burned or any other kind of religious text that would be around. In Nazi Germany, certainly, Jewish books would be burned. Because of what's being done with the Holocaust and things like that. So the idea of books being burned, books being censored is certainly not out of the realm of possibility in the 1940s, 1950s. Today's world, certainly people will still protest books. You'll have books that are pulled from shelves in libraries because people think it's not age appropriate for kids who can see them. You'll have books in schools that are, you could have things that are challenged where we don't think this book should be taught, we don't think that this book should be available, or we at least don't think that this book should be mandatorily read by all people. Probably of the books that you've read so far, like with 9th grade, I would think To Kill a Mockingbird would probably be the most controversial one. And that would be a book where a lot of people go, I love that book, that's a great book. But because of, sensitive topics, whether it be, race, crime that's involved with it, use of N-word, those would all be reasons as to why books could be challenged. I'd say it's pretty few and far between that a book gets removed from a public school now, but it's more of, no, I don't think my son or daughter should be forced or compelled to read this book, and then some kind of substitute we offer them in the case. Pardon? You come like, yeah, just sign. McCarthyism. So I mentioned about McCarthyism before. Little background for it. This guy is Senator Joseph McCarthy. He is a senator from Wisconsin in the 1950s. He kind of grows to power in the sense that he becomes part of a House committee that is out there to end communism and end the threat of communism within the United States. The term that gets used a lot is a witch hunt, where he basically is, in his mind, trying to remove anyone who would have any kind of communist sympathies or ideals about them. In some cases, he certainly could be removing people who could have ties to the Communist Party. He also is certainly identifying a lot of people who have no connection with the Communist Party whatsoever, but by identifying them and labeling them as a communist, he's essentially ruining careers. Entertainers are a big group of folks who get identified. Writers, actors, directors, movie producers, things like that. Because the idea is they could be spreading communist values through books, TV, movies, things like that. But if you are identified as a known communist, the chances of you being able to continue to work in whatever your career would be ends up being pretty much slim to none. His big push takes place from about 1952 to 1956. But it's a movement that becomes widespread out of fear, where if I accuse Nate Belak is a communist, what happens if he argues against me? Well, clearly he's a communist, because only a communist would argue against him. So what does Nate end up doing as a way to maybe not have as stiff of a punishment? And maybe do one other thing. Accept it, but also identify other communists. Well, yes, I admit it, but Logan was at the meeting, and Maddie was at the meeting, and Jack was at the meeting as well. So they'll go down with me. And then you have the domino effect where those folks also start identifying other people. So you kind of end up having this witch hunt taking place where people are just blindly pointing fingers at other people, identifying them as being communists. By 1956, 1957, the fear kind of starts to subside and it's not as big, and by the 1960s it's kind of come to an end. But it's the practice of making not just accusations, but blind accusations of disloyalty, subversion, treason, without having any kind of real evidence. So it was simply enough to go, I think you did this because I think you might have done it.
What was it?
Joseph McCarthy. Joseph McCarthy. He's Republican senator, but really it wasn't like a Republican thing versus a Democrat thing or whatnot. He didn't care if you were Republican, Democrat, pick whatever party. He was just starting to identify people as being communists. Well, and from a political standpoint, it worked for a large amount of time. What ends up happening is the show's not around, but it would kind of be the equivalent of like a 60 Minutes on CBS News, investigation. They took a stand against him and started doing reports and commentaries, which kind of got public awareness more so for it. But it wasn't something that a lot of other channels were looking to do, because if you were going against McCarthy and calling him un-American, basically you were opening yourself up for, well, we're communists and that's why we're trying to take them down. So Bradbury certainly kind of plays off of this fear a lot within his book, where he is looking at what could happen in a nation that maybe goes too far. So Bradbury claims with the book that he's trying to prevent the future. He's trying to keep it from turning into this world that he thinks he could. So far as future developments, he doesn't talk about iPhones necessarily, but earbuds, and they get referred to as seashells, little headphones. Earbuds, big screen TVs, interactive TVs, those are things that become big within Fahrenheit 451. Rise in violence, growing illiteracy, the inability to read, and then also, and this is probably a big thing for us, taking condensed forms of information. When we see headlines, and it could be something in a newspaper, but it could be like on a Twitter news feed or just websites, we get a little snippet of information and then we kind of make big picture statements, analysis about it. We don't necessarily always look for the whole truth to things, and that would be one of the things that he's certainly railing against within his book. Probably not tomorrow, but on Thursday, we're going to take a look, and it's dated a little bit. I think it came out in 2010, but we're going to take a look at an investigative kind of reporting about how maybe TV and phone has gone too far. And so this whole idea, have we been oversaturated by technology? Certainly will be an idea that we talk about, but we'll also kind of take a look at like some scientific research that goes along with it, where are we able to handle information coming from multiple screens? Can we multitask and do many things well? So this will be something that we'll look at certainly within the realm of the book, but also kind of beyond the book as well. The book you don't need to bring with you specifically to class until Tuesday of next week, but I would certainly have it with you so that if you get some extra time at the end of the class, study hall or whatever, take some time to read through it. You can certainly do it as I take. You have a week to break it down into small snippets. If anyone has scheduled questions, like I know Nate had one, if you have scheduled questions about where you're going later today, let me know, because I can show you what that is. Tomorrow, like no newspaper. So notes are available on Google. I appreciate knowing it.